Hello, everyone. Welcome to the panel on sustainable development in tropical forests. Thank you all so much for being here. And if you're here in person, thank you so much for braving the cold. So our moderator for this session today is Gary Dunning. Gary is the executive director of the Forest School, as well as the Forests Dialogue. And I will now pass it over to him to get us started.
Thank you, Kaylee. Can everybody hear me? I hope so. Well, good morning from an extremely frigid but sunny New Haven, Connecticut. And for those of you online, you're probably happy to be online at the moment because it is dangerously cold out. I actually heard that the wind chill on Mount Washington in New Hampshire broke a record today. It was 107 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. So that's pretty cold. It's not quite so cold here. Not quite, but it is below zero if you're out in the wind. Anyway, good morning. We're so happy that you're able to join us for this panel. This is the third day of the ISTF conference, the morning panel. And today, or this morning, we're going to be talking about sustainable development and tropical forests. We have an excellent group of panelists for you today. We're really going to look at some depth into how you maintain sustainable, healthy forests while also considering the very important questions of human support, human development, livelihoods, and those kinds of things. Very important. We have panelists from all over the world that are going to share their experiences and how they do work in this sector. So we want to highlight projects and organizations and practitioners at the forefront of merging tropical forest protection and sustainable use with positive local and global benefits. So let's just jump right in. We have a lot to cover today, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for your questions and thoughts as we move through the discussion. So I'm going to introduce our panelists one at a time and ask them to kind of give an open on particularly their work as it relates to sustainable development in tropical forests, context setting, and share a little bit about their organizations. And then we'll dive deeper into some of the issues related to and challenges related to sustainable forestry, tropical forests, and sustainable development. First, let me introduce Milagre Nuvunga. Milagre is the executive director of the MICAIA Foundation. Full disclosure, Milagre is also one of my bosses. She's the co-leader of the Forest Dialogue. And I'm very proud and happy to be able to work with Milagre quite a bit. But more importantly, Milagre really does run a crucial and important foundation in Mozambique. She's Mozambican, she's trained as a forester. Milagre has a long and very interesting CV, including working with and within the Mozambican government on conservation and environmental issues. She's worked with the UN and with the Ford Foundation. So Milagre, could you, say hello to the group this morning and give us a bit of background on MICAIA Foundation's work in sustainable development and the support of tropical forests?
Okay, thank you, Gary. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm not sure where you are joining us from today. My name is Milagre. I'm the co-founder and the executive director of the MICAIA Foundation. I'll tell you more about MICAIA, but I wanted just to start by saying that the reason why I became a co-founder of this organization is that understanding that there's no us in them in tropical forests or any other forests in the world. We are part of nature, and therefore what we need to learn or relearn is that we need to find ways to live with nature within nature as part of it. And it was because of that that we decided to establish the MICAIA Foundation or MICAIA as an entity, which is a hybrid entity. And we say that because we have both an operating foundation, which is MICAIA Foundation, of which I am the executive director, but also MICAIA Limited, which is a social enterprise. We understood that to work on human development, we needed to do that in the context of nature, and so it was important that if on one side we had the foundation to help communities implement donor or government-funded or even self-funded activities, we also needed to help them connect to the markets so that they could find sustainable ways of bringing back the money they needed to keep on funding their own work or their own growth. And so we have then the MICAIA Limited, which does exactly that. And on our side, we help companies have access to social and impact investments that could maybe help soften the blow of commercial lending rates. And we also have an advisory group based in the UK that helps us connect with like-minded partners or funders to help us grow this work, both in Mozambique, but also regionally and internationally. We address work in 5 different areas: food security and local food economy, active citizenship, sustainable landscapes, diverse and inclusive local economy, and of course the development of commercially successful community businesses, of which we have already implemented 3. One, a community lodge, where the communities own 60% of the shares and the MICAIA owns the other 40. We have another Mozambique honey company where communities own 34% of those shares, and Baobab Products Mozambique, where communities own 20%. So the last 2, the one on the honey value chain and the one on Baobab value chain, are trading commercially both nationally and internationally. And as I said, they are shareholdings. And so for us, we believe that it's important. As we do all of this work, we are very aware that communities are not like a homogeneous group. And we know that even within communities, although sometimes we look at them as an entity, we are very aware of the fact that, particularly in our patriarchal communities, there are many inequalities within, and so we try to find ways to ensure that whatever we do with our community partners and other stakeholders does not entrench those inequalities. But together we can find ways of reducing or eliminating these inequalities, which is important if we want everyone to be as committed to sustainable growth. So I'll stop there.
That's great. Thank you, Milagre. And just to mention that I've had the opportunity to have some of the honey from Milagre's community enterprises, and it's probably some of the best honey I've ever had. So that's pretty terrific, Milagre, what you all are able to do there in direct collaboration with the communities. Let me introduce now the gentleman to my left, Andika Putraditama. Andika is head of Rimba Collective at Lestari Capital. I've known Andika for a number of years now. Andika is Indonesian, and he's trained in forest science. Prior to working with Lestari, Andika was with WRI in Indonesia, and we got to know him through some of the Forest Dialogues work there in Indonesia. So, Andika, similar question to you. Maybe you can give us some background around your organization and Lestari Capital, and set it in the context of Indonesia with the sustainable development and tropical forest context.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Gary, for the introduction. And yeah, as Gary mentioned, I work for a company called Lestari Capital, in which I manage one of the flagship initiative called Rimba Collective. But I think I can talk a bit about, I guess, as a context setting. For those of you who are here since day one of the conference, you've heard a lot about how tropical forest plays a role in, mitigating the climate crisis, as well as balancing the microclimate, but also have a socioeconomic benefit as well. But I think the keynote speech by Pablo yesterday really highlights the issues and the challenge that we are facing in the developing tropics, and that is tropical forest is a conflict of region. It's conflict of interest, conflict of economic value, and this is what is happening in Indonesia as well. More often than not, forest land in Indonesia and in Southeast Asia really is much more valuable when they were felled or when they were converted into something else, into commercial or monoculture plantations. And this is the basic issue that we are facing. And if we want to conserve more forest, then we have to come up with a way to value it in a way that enables the market to also have money on the table to compete with that commercialization. And we can talk about externalities as well as natural capital accounting of the forest. But you have to go a step further to actually realize the valuations that is put on the paper and come up with a scheme to do that. And this is where Lestari Capital role is doing right now. We're trying to connect the market to conservation activities in Southeast Asia. And Rimba Collective I think it's a very unique mechanism where you link forest conservation and restoration financing into the volume of procurement of raw commodities the company has. And so Rimba Collective was born out of, I guess, concern as well as a hope that companies who are procuring raw commodities from the tropical forest have to share back or go beyond not just no deforestation policy, but contributing to a nature positive way. And so the way Rimba Collective work, the contribution model for the company is we look into the procurement volume of palm oil that they have in their value chain. And the more they use palm oil, the more they have to put investment into Rimba Collective. And then Lestari Capital, as the manager of the Rimba Collective initiative, we curate and also manage this portfolio of projects of conservation and restoration in Southeast Asia. And the more interesting thing is that this contract, where we sign a contract with the project operators on the ground to do conservation and restoration, is not primarily linked to carbon, because I think we know that there's this explosion of interest around carbon, but this is linked to actually hectares of number of conservation and hectares of restoration, and carbon is considered as the additional of that contract. And so we have climate outcomes, which is basically carbon emission reductions and removal. We have livelihood ecosystem services outcomes, and we have biodiversity outcomes as well. And so I think this way it enables Rimba Collective to invest on projects that are not only carbon viable, but it allows us to look for projects that are adjacent to underdeveloped communities, or maybe have a biodiversity hotspot that we want to fund. So it allows us to have much more diverse portfolio of projects. So I think I'll stop there.
Perfect. Thanks, Andika. And we're going to talk more about deforestation and measures to help curb that in a moment. But thanks for introducing us to that. So let me introduce our third panelist. It's Fabíola Zerbini. Fabíola is is the Director of Forestry, Land Use and Agriculture at WRI. Fabíola is Brazilian and was trained in law and environmental sciences. Before WRI, she worked with several multi-stakeholder coalitions, including FSC Brazil and the Tropical Forest Alliance. So Fabíola, again, similar question. Please share with us the work that, the focus of your work with WRI, how it relates to sustainable development and tropical forests, and describe a little bit about the situation that you work there in Brazil.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure, honor to be here. I think, first of all, no, like it's not an issue of a sustainable development for tropical forests, but is a sustainable economic development model where tropical forest is a central pillar. So I think this is the key, I think, concept that we are trying, as WRI Brazil, WRI globally, Andika knows that, but also other organizations are trying to really bring to the table to really change the perception that forest protection is a cost. Forest protection is an investment, and as much as we understand that forest is also mainly for our countries, Brazil, some of the countries in Africa where tropical forests are in the center now of the land use coverture, and also in Southeast Asia, Indonesia mainly, how really use forests as an asset. For sure, to avoid the hydric crisis, the climate crisis, to change the social inequality gain now, but more than these, to provide economic growth for our countries. So I think this is the point that we are trying to, the case that we are trying to make. And I will bring one example. Look into Pará state. Pará is a subnational government, the second largest state in Brazil, the first in the Amazon, the first economy in the Amazon, the 11th economy in Brazil. Very important state in the context of water, for sure in the Amazon. So it's a very important case. And if you look to the restoration, we are working with the government of Pará to build the restoration public policy. The target that they have is to restore 5 million hectares by 2030. It's a lot, and we did an estimative. It's an estimative. It's still being detailed. It's still being better studied, by new models and diagnosis. But we did an estimative just for 3 million hectares by 2030. And bringing different models of restoration, natural assisted restoration, agroforestry, ecological restoration, and different scenarios. But the result was that there's a potentiality to increase from $5 to $7 billion, the GDP of the state. Only if we really foster, strain the restoration economy in the state. And this can be done together with the IPOC, because the indigenous people are very connected with seeds. I forgot the name in English, but you understand, with seeds, and also the settlements and the medium and the smallholders are very connected with the agroforestry. And also, if you bring carbon, biodiversity, or nature credits, I still don't know if I like this name, but let's follow the conventions and the global names. But if you connect all the other elements that are being now discussed, to the economic equation, and change the perception that this is, again, not a cost, but this is an investment opportunity, and shift the political economy and the private and public investment to, instead of invest in deforestation supply chains, invest on economic sectors that promote conservation, and more than this, restoration, as we are stating for, in not more than 7 years, we really can have a different economic perspective and model being not implemented, but being lived by the whole state, by the people on the forests, and again, having the forest in the center of the economic model that is being implemented at that state. And if we prove the concept in a state as Pará, for sure that it can be replicated, it can be scaled many other Amazonian states, not only in the Brazilian Amazon, but also in the Pan-Amazonic other countries, and mainly potentially now, and this is also part of the South-South collaboration, I think that we really need to reinforce. So there are other examples on Atlantic forest, for sure that it needs to be done in a connected way with the federal level that now are in favor of these public policies and perspectives again here in Brazil. But I will stop here and let's keep talking about other ways to really make this happen and bring other elements of this conversation.
Thanks, Fabíola, and that really helps us see the complexity of some of these challenges when you try to merge sustainable development and protection or sustainable management of tropical forests. In developing this panel, we had asked the organizers to share some of the key questions that they wanted you all to kind of cover and think about. So I want to cover some of those questions now. Fabíola, back to you. Obviously, the public hears a lot about deforestation challenges, particularly in Brazil, in the Brazilian Amazon, and more recently about how deforestation is really ramped up in the Amazon and Brazil. I think there's concern when we talk about sustainable development. A lot of people obviously equate that to a net cost to the forest or a net loss potentially to the forest. And in over a number of years, there's been a lot of attention on deforestation-free supply chains and whatnot. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how your work is addressing deforestation in the supply chain.
This is something I think, something where Brazil is quite advanced, but still a lot to be done. And WRI, but also other organizations have been done and have been working a lot on this. Now, I think we have to think on soy and cattle, these two different sectors that are in different stages. Soy sector, and the key point, I think, is still like, and both, I think, but mainly for the soy sector is the legal deforestation. So I don't see a huge problem related with soy sector connected with illegal deforestation. So Brazil Forest Code still allows the private properties, the private farmers to deforest certain percentage of their properties, depending on the biome that they are, could be 50 to 20% of the land. So this is what we call legal deforestation. In the end of the day, deforestation is deforestation, but if they are allowed to do. So the question here is incentives, how to really change the cost of opportunity of the land in favor of conservation or in favor of restoration, because part of the land or part of the percentage that needs to be protected is not and needs to be regularized. So all the work that we are doing, Craig and others, are to combine different models, like try to really bring different models like carbon, again, biodiversity, but also regenerative agriculture, bring a kind of a landscape perspective for the whole property to really make the case in favor of an economic model where protect the percentage that could be deforested, or even more, regularize the land that was by the law, it's an obligation that would be protected, to really incentivize the producers to do not deforest and change the cost of opportunity of the land. This is the key point. But on the cattle is different. Cattle is still a big problem. Oh, sorry. Why soy sector is different is because we export almost 90% of our production. So this is super drive by the international market, and international market is the one who really drives international commitments, the legislation, the new due diligence legislation, etc. Make all the soy producers in some way really follows at least on the illegal side, but the legal is still a problem. The other point, cattle is a huge problem because cattle is still very focused on national market where there's no any commitments, zero deforestation commitments related, or no pressure from the consumers, no pressure from the supermarket, and so what's happening? It's a very complex supply chain now. So I think the key attention that we need to really pay for is traceability, transparency. We need to work, and this is what we are doing. The new economic model for the Brazilian Amazon, I think, is key. As much as we could shift the investments to the cattle production, to the restoration, as I mentioned before, for instance, as much people we could get out from the cattle production in the Amazon, for instance, to the restoration economic sector, much better, because this is the problem. No, we need to give it another economic opportunity for people who are still living by the cattle production. And for sure, you have the big ones and you have the small ones, different strategies for different people, but it's still a pretty much more complex situation. And at least from now, WRI is more focused on how to really change in a medium long term instead of other organizations are doing. Keep working on the global commitments that will have an impact, but not in the size that they need to be done, that they need to have, because the percentage of the cattle production that is exported is really, small in comparison with what they are deforesting and the size of the problem that they are representing in relation with the problem that we need to avoid together. So yeah, there are many other things to be talking here, but just stopping here, please. If you need any clarification answer, let me know.
No, Fabíola, I appreciate that. These are extremely complex challenges, right? And in Andika, in thinking about deforestation in the context of Indonesia and the drivers and creating, I think Lestari Capital obviously is thinking about creating new incentives to kind of curb that deforestation. What do you see as some of the biggest barriers in creating those incentives and in your work addressing specifically with the deforestation challenge?
Right. I think linking back to what Fabíola said as well, I mean, if the driver is economic pressure to convert this land into seen as much more commercially producing, Lestari Capital's approach is to also come up with evaluations that can be seen as an alternative development model for the local government, for the community. But I think one of the biggest challenges that we are facing right now is that even though the demand is there to fund this conservation and restoration, the investable projects are not as many as we thought, right? So, because we need to be able to see these projects in the long run. Once we sign a contract, it's a 25 years contract. Not many organizations have the capacity as well as the track record to do that kind of long-term conservation restoration activities. That's one thing. The second is that I think from the Rimba collective perspective, or Lestari Capital's perspective, we don't want to just invest on projects that are highly threatened, has massive carbon credit potential, but we also want to invest on forest frontier landscape. And I think from the traditional additionality perspective, the indicators are not there yet. There has been some work, I think, being led by WCS that looks into how can we develop a high integrity forest credit market. R3s is, I think, is starting to recognize the importance of providing incentive for forest frontiers landscapes as well. But it's not as advanced as the traditional additionality standpoint. So I think in the next phase of this evolution of payment for ecosystem services, it will be interesting to see how that indicators would play out and how that pie of financing could also go through this forest frontier landscape that might not be as threatened as Sumatra or Kalimantan, but it is still very important to buffer in terms of economic alternative, right? To buffer the appetite to convert that into other land uses.
Thanks, Andika. That's really interesting. Milagre, I want to ask you kind of a similar question, but I know the drivers perhaps in Mozambique for deforestation might be slightly different than you see in the regions in Brazil and in Indonesia. Do you feel like in the work that you've been doing with MICAIA Foundation that in the communities that you engage, is there still a strong threat of deforestation?
Well, Mozambique doesn't escape the global trend of deforestation, be it because of high population growth. We have a very, very young and population, and it's growing very fast. And because it's a poor country, let's say, the dependence on land and natural resources is still extremely high, and so that and if you also consider the very low rate of literacy and quality of education, then the alternatives are not many outside of land and natural resources. So just for normal livelihoods, depending on mostly on agriculture and shifting cultivation for that, to big developments that are happening, because Mozambique is well known for the amount of land it has, and so we have many companies coming on board, taking land either for forestry projects or huge agriculture or monocultures and others, and but also we now have a growing mining sector, which is taking large areas, and that's something that the world is still looking at gas and oil with two minds, I think. I'm sorry, I hope you can still hear me.
We can hear you, but there's some very colorful lines.
Yes, but as long as you can hear me, I'll continue.
We can hear you.
So the threats are there, and what I think what we're doing, or what we are concentrating more and more right now, is on trying to see how we can work on mindsets. Because for everything that has been said by my colleagues here, it's also the recognition that this is not going to have just technical solutions, that as decision makers, we need to change our mindsets. We are making all these big, many words, big words are being said in the international arena, but our practice is still the same. And so if we actually change that at all levels, at the community level, as a community national level, where the MICAIAs of this world work, to institutions or companies that work at a more international level, we all need to change the way we look at forests, the way we look at conservation, the way we look at development. And also, I think another panelist, I don't know, I think both mentioned the value of conservation, or the value of commodities, or even that passes through that mindset change. What is it that we value? Why do we value that? How much we value our own well-being? And so I think, particularly in a conference like this, where we have many students who are going to go out into the world and make their own mark, I think there's a huge opportunity here where they can go there with a different mindset, looking at these issues differently, valuing things differently, and pushing for change. Because otherwise, well, when they go and work in these big financial institutions and others, where the value is placed will make a difference in how where forestry is placed, how much we value our well-being, how much we value this adaptation to climate change, and how we are going to survive. And so if we put a value on that, we can change it.
Thanks for that, Milagre. That's excellent advice. Oh, and you're back. Hello. I'd like to stick on one of the points you made about working with community. Obviously, MICAIA Foundation, very well set up to engage with community. That is the primary way that you do your work and you protect the environment and you work with community to understand and value those resources. So can you talk a little bit more about how exactly you're working within your community there? How do you engage with them? What are some of the barriers to that engagement that we need to think about? Milagre, you need to unmute. Sorry.
Sorry.
No worries.
I think I'll start really with the valuation just by sharing something. When we go into a community and we have these conversations, trying to understand how they view nature, what they take from nature, what they value in nature, the conversation normally ends up on what species they use and why they use them, what for. And when it comes to some of them, or to many of them, they say, we do this because we are poor. There's a perception there of if you depend on forests or on nature to live for your well-being, you are poor. And so that's where we begin, trying to shift that perception within communities where we work. But also, through this, we work mostly in the development of non-timber forest products, value chains. By doing that, we also make them understand how valued natural products are in Mozambique and around the world, and also by connecting them to these lucrative markets nationally and internationally. That there is an incentive there for them to conserve or sustainably manage what they have, and even as they use those as part of these value chains, they also invest in its rehabilitation, because it's not about not using, because we are there as a part of that of nature we use, but we also need to learn to give back, and it's that interactive process that we work on saying, if we are going to enter into this, and even if you are going to have a sustainable living as population grows, and as also the maybe demand grows, how can you do that and keep on replenishing nature? Because of course we have those plants can be reproduced, and we need to use them, and it's that interaction, our role in making sure that the species do not disappear, and we understand how important they are for the water, for the quality of air and everything, but also bringing in the money they need to invest in even more sustainable ways. And so we work not only in addressing subsistence, but also in ensuring that there are sustainable ways to take those products through sustainable value chains for local, national, and international markets.
Thanks, Milagre. And I think, again, MICAIA Foundation is a great example of a very localized intervention and work with communities that immediately surround some of the landscapes there where Milagre is based. Fabíola, you work on a larger scale in the work that you do, but obviously you engage with a lot of different stakeholders. How do you engage with local communities? How do you engage with local communities and make sure you understand those connections, make sure that the value of the work that you're trying to do is translated down to the communities that will benefit from that work?
Oops. Yeah. I will start talking something more about my background. I used to work for 10 years with solidarity economy here in Brazil in the beginning of the century, and fair trade, circular economy, family agriculture, just before start to work in the FSC and then the TFA. And I always felt a huge difficulty to really bring, the social agenda on an economic perspective to the environmental agenda. And bring the social inequality problem as something that can be internalized and think it, not with an easy solution, there's no easy solution, but just something that it's as important as. And I'm not saying that trees are more important than people, not that, no, I'm saying that how to really understand that the social inequality is as important or is, so basically, departing from this, like I think that now we are living a first time, and Milagre for sure, and other experiences around the world, would say that it has started before, because it's nothing that it is starting now. But I think that now we do have an opportunity to really change the game and really start to stop to talk and start to really internalize the social agenda and how one of the works that we are doing in Pará, and this is a kind of a premise that we, as the forest program in WRI Brazil, are really kind of fighting to keep, is that we will really focus our effort in create job opportunities or bring restoration to the table, or all the investments, attraction, whatever, to what we are calling as collective territories, which could be called as IPLCs, indigenous people, local communities. But in Brazil, this means so much. But we call it collective territories, means people who are managing collectively one territory. And could be indigenous people, could be settlements, could be, and we are working, for instance, with the MST, which is the land, I don't know how to say it in English, it's the landless movement. Landless movement.
Yes.
It's huge movement, very focused on agroecology in Brazil. The biggest producers, rice producers in Latin America, organic rice producers in Latin America, they have a campaign in Brazil that is called Plant 1 billion trees, feed people sustainably. And this is the areas that they manage, that they plant, that they produce, are huge in the country. And in Pará State, we are restoring 1,000 hectares, which is almost nothing, but we are working to having them as the actors of their restoration. So we are working with them and not training them, because they are training us as well. We are working together to having them as the protagonists of their own restoration processes. So they are making the technical assistance to their other settlements. They are planting. They are making the geospatial analysis on their own land, and this has been a very wonderful experience. Because in the end of the day, more than the hectares restored, acai and other products being sold, and revenue being generated, and some better lives, but also they will be part of the restoration supply chain, as I mentioned since the beginning. They can, and what is happening right now is, considering that they are a national movement, they are spreading the message to other Amazonian states and exchanging with southern states, and etc. So this is one example. There are other here in Atlantic Forest, which is different players, and different contexts, but we we have a concrete and very, I can say this because this is something that we really stated as a program is all our efforts and investments attracted and all the public, everything that we could really direct and guide to support the local communities and indigenous people but not as a beneficiary. This is very important, not as beneficiary of something, no, but as economic actors, political actors of something that it's being built together. You know, they are the ones who will build this new stand forest economy together with us and also teaching us how to do it in many ways, more than us teaching them. So this, I think, it's one of the main, I think the most inspiring things and challenging things that I've been, because it's still a challenging issue to really make it, and we are still many times talking about communities or indigenous peoples, etc., as beneficiaries and not as political and economical actors that really more than often knows more than us, you know, like how to make this stand forest economy. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that, Fabíola, and I appreciate the point about obviously we're engaging in the communities. It's not one-way communication. It really is learning and communication and information going both ways, being appreciated and valued, and having that information reflected as these projects go forward. Andika, speaking of the projects, I mean, you're working with investors and you're developing projects with your clients. How do you integrate the community into this process as well? Are they direct beneficiaries of these investments?
Yeah, so I think from Rimba Collective and the users of Rimba Collective perspective, what companies get is the ecosystem services outcomes claims, right? So they can say that they've supported X numbers of conservation and restorations across Southeast Asia that contributed to X numbers of livelihood, etc. So that's the model of return on investments that Rimba Collective has. But I think from Rimba Collective with the communities and the project operators, this is where we rely on the project operators on the ground. So when we first started the project origination, we look into the area, we look into the ecosystem services outcomes that are out there, including livelihood and biodiversity. And this is a process of dialogue between us and the project operators and the communities. What is needed the most in that area is going to be factored into the budgeting process, into the cost of the project and the contract as well. And so we have a couple of different project typology that looks into this. So in some area that is very remote from the road and the center of populations, the communities there might not need a lot of economic empowerment of added value of commodities, but for some communities that already have productions of NTFP, what we might want to do might be connecting them with the right markets, adding value into that productions. And so we work together with Impact Accelerator as well to help them connect with the market and find the right way to bring added value into the NTFP products that they have. And again, so this is the lesson learned, I think, is conservation and restoration is always site-specific. It's always there's always local context that needs to be taken into account, and this is one reason why as well. Lestari Capital and Rimba Collective as a demand aggregator, we don't have a fixed price on how many dollar per hectares should we pay to the project operators and the communities. We always ask back, how much do you need to conserve this amount of hectares, restore this amount of hectares, and to produce that amount of livelihood improvement or biodiversity protection. So the average cost of doing this kind of project would really be based on that kind of dialogue with the project operators and the communities.
Okay. Sticking with this theme a little bit, there's interest, I think we all kind of think about how projects like yours and Fabiola's and Milagre's, where the funding comes from, what the source of the funding is for those projects. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your investors, and maybe share with us a little bit about how the investors' interests really do influence, or not, but how they probably really influence the decisions that you make and the projects that you take forward.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So for Rimba Collective, this is coming from the concern from the CGMs, the consumer goods manufacturer, that's sourcing palm oil from Indonesia, right? So the four users of Rimba Collective that is now exists is Unilever, PepsiCo, Procter & Gamble, and Nestle. So these are four of the biggest CGM in the world. And their intention of investing fund into this Rimba Collective is really to go beyond their NDP commitment. And some of them also have some
NDP, can you?
Oh, sure. The no deforestation, no peat, and no exploitation. So this is the common term that I guess the industry used to refer to that kind of commitment. And some of them have much more explicit commitment on protecting forest, protecting a critical ecosystem. And so their interest to invest in Rimba Collective, initiative like Rimba Collective, is to fulfill their commitment in a way. And whether it influences the project originations, the project designs, I think there's, so all of these users are sitting within our steering committee, so they have a say on, where should we go, where should we diversify in terms of the project typology. But in terms of selecting and curating the projects, it is completely within the Rimba Collective team. I think it's fair to say as well that they wanted a much more diverse project typology portfolio, and this is also a strength for Rimba Collective, because once we diversify, we're much more risk tolerant, right? If one project fails, the other still buffers for that. And with the emergings of global commitments such as at the SBTI, now we have SBTN, TNFD, and all that acronyms, right? It also influences how they see conservation and restoration. So, for example, when we talk to other tiers of company, not CGM, not the consumer goods manufacturer, but the processor and traders of palm oil, for example, they don't have a consumer-facing business. The CGM have consumer-facing business, right? So they care more about biodiversity, they care more about livelihood, but talking with processor and traders, they care about their buyers, which is the Unilevers and the likes. It changes the way the conversation goes, because now they only care about what their buyer wants and what the global market perceived to be a good practices. For example, SBTI. Most of the processor and traders that we talked to wanted to have an SBTI compliant scope 3 emission reduction, and so that would also factor into our project originations. How can we cater to that request, cater to that demand, without undermining the importance of branching out to biodiversity focused projects and livelihood focused projects? But I think it's an interesting dynamic that we see plays out once this global platform becoming more and more mainstream.
It's really interesting. I want to come back to this in a little bit, not right now, because I want to also ask Fabíola and Milagre a similar question, but we're going to talk just a brief question about how international organizations or coalitions can influence consumer goods companies, right? And I know we were at a meeting way back when where the idea, the very germ of the idea of the accountability framework began.
Right.
So we'll come back to that in a little bit. Milagre, are you there? I think you're there. Can you hear us?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I think, again, the MICAIA Foundation model is so fascinating. Obviously, maybe you can talk a little bit about the social enterprise work of MICAIA and how those goods and the selling of those goods through the social enterprise effort help with your conservation efforts around the forests. So looking at your funding, basically.
Okay, I was trying to see if I could make my camera work, but I hope if you can hear me, that's good.
We hear you very clearly.
Great. So again, we work at a smaller scale, but as I mentioned before, we are exporting. We are exporting to Europe. We are exporting to the US. We are exporting regionally as well, and we are exporting non-timber forest products, and we're doing that in a world, in an environment where people are more and more aware of the challenges, aware of the importance of sustainable ways of producing these goods, particularly because they are non-timber forest products, and we have had mostly funding coming from social and impact investors. So the social and environmental credentials of the funding sources are already there. But also, I think I wanted to mention here a huge movement that's happening, that's linked to, or it's the hashtag Shift the Power, where I think many of you will have known or come across. It is a growing movement where we have national, international NGOs. We also have donors who have joined this movement, where they are looking more to be guided not by the big international interests, but shifting the priorities of for development to what these communities need, to listen more, and not to say, today our funding goes for this, and therefore whoever wants our funding has to dance to this tune or that one, but really shifting that. And there are conversations ongoing. There have been conferences in Africa, in Europe already about that, and we are a part of that movement as well. And we're having very interesting conversations with our donors and others. So this, I think it's a movement to watch and see how this goes, and how that will slowly start influencing the way funding, development funding, conservation is done. And so through our social enterprises, because of the shareholding model that we have, I should say the share model that we have is being seen as a good story for many of those who are buying these products. And so people want to at least, if they're not doing it, they want to wear the right credentials, and we provide that, because these are products produced by forest communities who are getting the best price in the land, but also they are shareholders in the companies that are exporting, meaning that they don't just get that good primary pricing for the products themselves, but also when the company exports or sells, they also get a share of the profits. And so these are stories that the consumers want to hear more about, and they are willing to invest, because those companies that cannot associate themselves with stories such as these, they lag behind, because they need to be seen as doing good and being part of a sustainable value chain that's really taking into account these aspects. And so I think I'll stop there for now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks for that, Milagre. And just to confirm, that's hashtag Shift the Power, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I know there's a lot of folks in this room that would be very interested in that if they don't know about it already. Mm-hmm. Thanks for mentioning that. Fabíola, I've worked with WRI a long time, and I know WRI is very careful about curating and doing due diligence on its donors. and making sure that there is, you know, a lot of communication about where the funds are coming into the organization and how that translates into action on the ground. Can you talk a little bit? I think a lot of us would be curious because WRI is such a large global NGO. How do you talk to donors about WRI projects and the influence that they may be able to have on implementation of those projects? Can you share a little bit about WRI's mode of communicating to donors?
Yeah, great. I think first the big issue is really have autonomy on your own strategic planning and vision. You know, so this is crucial now, and WRI, but I think other organizations as big and also others now as we are the ones that we are talking here, really keep autonomy on your strategic thinking and planning. You know, so first movement that WRI really have is a very strong strategic planning cycle process. No, so we just finished one like to 2023, 2027, and this is and when we talk about this plan with the donors, we talk collectively. So let's really talk about the strategic plan, the impact targets, and how WRI is an interesting point as well. No, there's a scientific, very strong science. It's scientific support. No, so okay, what's the global targets that the best science is already setting to the world on that topics that we as WRI are planning to really touch, and really work with. And then we establish where WRI is, like how much should we commit ourselves in terms of the global targets. So there are the WRI targets, and then we talk about that targets, and we talk about the strategies that are needs to be put in place to really achieve them collectively with the donors. But for sure that to really implement it, there's a composition of different projects, and each of these projects and each of this has different models, and so the international cooperation works in one way, the private sector works in another way, and this is, I think, where you mentioned now. So the whole vetting process and the whole there's a huge attention to really guarantee that, first, and I think this is also shared by other organizations. Now, let's really guarantee that the agenda is what matters. The agenda is what matters. It's not the money. So this is, I think, it's crucial, and this is because the recognition of an organization as our own, but also all the others who are in the working now with this topics are our main value. If we lose reputation, if we lose the credibility that what matters is the agenda, we lose everything. So I think any money is more than important than that. So I think keep it autonomy on your own plan, keep a high focus on the impacts and the agenda, and very collective conversations, but for sure, and see the limits case by case. But I want to bring another element, which is not exactly related with WRI, but related, or any other organization, but related with the transition agenda that needs to be funded. And something that and since I was in the Tropical Forest Alliance, and I would love to answer the question that you started to make to Andika, but we come back on it later in terms of the consumer goods companies. But since I was in the Tropical Forest Alliance, we worked a lot to build public-private governance on jurisdictions, on subnational governments or national or whatever, depending, but subnational better because it's a little bit more concentrated, to organize the flow of investments in a more systemic and coherent way in the territories. Because what still happens is each company, each international government, each international corporation, donor, whatever, World Bank, doesn't matter, no who, still looks to your own agenda in a specific or direct way, or looks to your own supply chain, or looks to your own sub-territory, or looks to your own, come on guys, we need to change this. No, we need to look into one territory in a more systemic way. And as much as we could organize the flow of investments, having a common and shared vision or goals agreed, you know, the impacts will be pretty much bigger, and the resources will be optimized. You know? I think that this is still a kind of a dream, because, and I'm not being naive here, I think that this is something that needs to be, we need to talk and talk and talk about it, because the problem is collective, no? The solution needs to be collective. And if we talk about collective action, and etc., we need to understand that investment needs to be collective as well. No? And this is how maybe the influence will, you know, like from one potential donor, you know, like, or one payer, doesn't need to be donor, can be another model, like investor could be different, and one payer, you know, and people who are putting money, whatever, it will be, you know, like if we have a public-private governance organizing the flow of investments, it will be like, you know, like minimize the risks of having this kind of political influence or even geopolitical influence, which happens a lot, and we don't talk a lot about this, you know, but needs to be also talked, you know, like, and so maybe another level of discussions on it, it's how our countries could be also empowered to organize the flow of investments in our countries in a different way, you know, like, and the NGOs or any other organization who reach investments, doesn't matter how, what model, has a responsibility to work in favor of the shared agenda. So I think this is maybe beyond our organization. I'll look to the shared agenda is one, but together, this is, yeah, just to bring you, it's still something a little bit far, no, but needs to be thinking, no.
Yeah, thanks for that, Fabíola. And I think I want to shift a little bit into, I do want to ask a couple more questions, but maybe we can do it really quickly because I want to open it up to the audience here and those online. So just a couple more questions, but maybe quick answers. And if you don't want to jump in, please don't, but please do if you do. So along those lines, and thinking about, we've talked a lot about the need for local engagement, local control for a lot of these projects on the ground, right? And we understand that importance, but we also know there's a huge amount of influence coming from international and national entities. The question is around, and this kind of relates to the Accountability Framework Initiative. They've come together to really influence and work with big brands to understand how to remove deforestation from the supply chain. Can you give us maybe another quick example of whether it's a foreign government, a philanthropic organization, NGO collaborations, or even businesses or business associations, maybe something like the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, somebody or an organization we've worked a lot with. How are the international influences really benefiting on the ground projects? If you give a quick example, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think...
Any of you. Sorry, I'm not calling on anybody. Anybody.
I can start. The answer is everyone, right? It's because it's a very interconnected network of influence that we're talking about. But what I see is the most effective to pull the lever of some of these actors on the ground that deforest and degrade the forest is the economic lever, right? Okay. So when you're talking about deforestation in Indonesia, the grower of palm oil, they would listen to their buyers. Their buyer will listen to the consumers. And a lot of this NGO, campaign NGO, state government that have commitment against deforestation, it really helps, focusing the pressure to the top level economic actors, and then slowly, but it will trickle down to the ground. I guess that's my short answer.
Okay. Fabíola or Milagre? Fabíola.
Very quickly, the Chinese Meat Association is discussing, also together with the AFI, but other organizations, a protocol to change the procurement rules on environmental for cattle. So it can be a big game changer for the cattle production in Brazil, at least for those who are exported, which goes mainly for China.
Can you name that organization or that collective again?
The Chinese Meat Association. It's a company, a private sector buyers, Chinese buyers alliance. They are discussing, and the WWF and the TFA and other organizations are supporting this dialogue. Okay. So I wish it really could evolve to a meaningful partnership between producers and buyers, Brazilian producers, Chinese buyers, to support a change in the cattle production and global trades.
Milagre.
Okay. I was going to go to something very different that we are a part of, together with organizations in Brazil, in Palestine, and many other places, which we are calling community philanthropy. Some of the changes are coming from working with communities so they can put themselves, their time, and their money where in the direction where they think they should go, themselves, their community, their environment, their forests, and so make them owners of that path. And so we have donors who are buying into it. It's in a way connected to shift the power, where the agenda is being set by communities and it's then being supported by other stakeholders, like NGOs and donors, etc. And so that also is helping in setting up that agenda and having it supported, because communities themselves are putting their money and their time, their knowledge and expertise in that particular. So, and as I said, it includes organizations in different parts of the world, in the north and south, and it's quite exciting.
Thanks for that, Milagre. There was a bit of interest about some examples of south-to-south collaboration in this arena. Is there anything that comes to mind really quickly that we can learn from in terms of south-to-south, talking about sustainable development in tropical forest?
Well, I can start, but maybe this is not my experience with Lestari, but with WRI actually. So in addressing the palm oil issue in Indonesia, we also look into other countries and how they is connected with this issue of palm oil in Indonesia. And fortunately, WRI also have a country office in India and in China. So we connect with this, South-South collaborations on how can we address the issue of palm oil supply chain from the perspective of the demand countries in China, because they buy a lot of palm oil from Indonesia, but also connecting it with India, where palm oil is becoming a new cash crop for India, right? So sharing of experiences happened in that kind of a South-South collaborations, but also connecting with the business actors in those three countries is really helpful to kind of set the connection and set the agenda together and attack the issue at hand with a much more collective manner.
Great, thanks, Andika. Any other thoughts on that? Otherwise, I think I want to open it. Fabíola.
Yeah, I'm thinking more as a kind of a next step instead of a concrete experience, but something that we are working and more globally instead of our countries, but Brazil is involved, is the strain a dialogue among the forest countries in relation with the due diligence European legislation that has been discussed. So how to really, organize a little bit more an understanding and a comprehension about how can we deal with the whole discussion and better position ourselves politically and also economically into that discussions, not only as an individual countries, but also collectively. So I wish it could evolve. It's not a WRI only issue, it goes beyond it. But I wish it could really evolve because it's, I think, something that will contribute a lot to really, strengthen the political willingness of the southern and the forest countries to participate in a global discussion, to understand how global trade could really impact on deforestation in a meaningful way, and you know, that's really where the southern voices are really well listened, and the results are good for all countries, both environmental, social, and economically.
Great, thanks for that.
Just wanted to add to that, not to repeat what was said, but just to add to the fact that what we are also putting a lot of emphasis on is on regional collaboration. For instance, we have in Southern Africa, we have a number of transfrontier conservation areas, and I think, a few days ago, there was a huge conference where we were discussing this nexus between conservation and development, and looking at community conservation, how communities can participate across border, how knowledge and expertise from one country could benefit the others, how governments can invest together in both in conservation and development in all of these important hotspots, biodiversity hotspots that we have, but also taking into account all the social issues that are pressing, particularly in countries like ours, where poverty is rife, and of course the push for development is critical. And so that kind of South-South collaboration, co-investment, etc., is really important, not only in the national level, but the regional level, because as a bloc, we can then be much more powerful within the continent and internationally.
Great, thank you, Milagre. We have time for just a couple questions, probably. Can we? We have mics. Anybody in the room?
Hi, thanks very much. I'd like to ask a little bit about the Rimba collective mechanism, because you talk about project operators. So who are these project operators? Is it NGOs, or can community apply for support with their, I don't know, like farmers association or something? And also about, do you mediate between companies and communities, or do you work mostly in Western Indonesia? Or if, for example, a community wants to save their forest, right? And because I had a lot of experience, and they just needed a little bit of money to save their forest, but they can't apply because there's no companies operating in their area. So they said, so do we need to lock our forest first and then we got money, or what, right? Because that's really bad, right? Yeah. Because, I mean, we want them to save the forest without having any deforestation first, exactly, so they can save it. But, so it's like chicken and egg, basically, right? So I don't know how this Rimba collective or Lestari capital works, because I've seen a lot of this type of, organization coming sort of everywhere. But I don't know how is the mechanism and the structure, and how can communities really benefit it from companies like, or organization like yours, right? Thank you.
Obviously, that question was for Andika, I think.
Can I answer directly?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I want to touch on a bit about the second issue first. You know, this is a very critical issue that we're facing in the current mechanism of incentivizing forest conservation, right? The traditional additionality looks into threat first, and then you can reward the forest. And I think this is just we need to find a better way to incentivize forests, and this is why I think the work being done with R3s and WCS of High 4 is more important than ever, because we need another indicators to better justify our investment in forest conservation. So I think that's one. On the project operator questions, it could be NGO, it could be community, it could be companies as well, as long as they have the rights to manage the land for the next 25 years, because the contract is good for 25 years, they can apply for this scheme. But I think the challenge is, not all of them might have the operational capacity to pass the due diligence, right? And this is, I think, what I want to voice out as well. A lot of the companies, a lot of NGOs, and a lot of donors are ready to put money into an investable project, but not many would want to fund for the readiness phase. So I think what is more important as well is to find ways to raise interest on readiness funding activities, so that communities who might not have existing capacity to pass the due diligence of this process can prepare themselves for a year or 2 years, and then they can apply for this scheme.
Okay, thanks for that. Another question from the audience?
Hello, my question is for Fabíola. My name is Jaime. I'm a coffee grower from Colombia. And my question is about coffee. I know you didn't mention, but we mentioned deforestation with, cattle and, ranching cattle and beef production, and also soy. What about coffee in Brazil? And what are your thoughts of coffee future in Brazil? Because, it's been really affected lately because climate change. Any thoughts?
It's true. Coffee in Brazil is not a deforestation driver of deforestation, but in Peru, Colombia also, but Peru is still a big issue. Also in the Amazon now. In Brazil, it's just because it's already deforested. It used to be the Atlantic forest, and now it's coffee or sugar cane. But I think for the whole Amazon, coffee and cocoa are important commodities that needs to be considered into the free deforestation context now, or agenda, global agenda now, and coffee as well. As much as we could position a sustainable coffee, both from a social and environmental perspective, and the social is very important because fair trade used to be so strong now in the continent, like coffee, fair trade coffee, etc. But also the free deforestation one, as much as we could position in the global market, the Latin America sustainable coffee and cocoa, I think better for all of us. But in Brazil, the main challenge is more on social issue instead of on deforestation, in connection with deforestation. So, but I like the question to maybe bring a more regional perspective. I hope I have answered.
Thanks, Fabíola. Okay, we're going to take one more question from the our online audience. The question's a bit long, but it asks for a short answer. So let me read this quickly. Plan Vivo just released their high-level standards for biodiversity credit, while Gold Standard and Vera are also in progress of developing their own standards for tradable nature/biodiversity credit. These efforts will add new financial instruments for conservation finance. If you could shape the standards of biodiversity credit, what would be your number one priority or concern? Maybe each of you could kind of give a quick one on that.
Is
that a tough one? Yeah, it's a tough one.
You want to start?
Milagre, are you still there? Just one. What's your...
Yeah, but I think I would still favor maybe a socially related one. I would look into not favoring, because it's difficult when you talk about standards. Then it's mostly about a combination. and talking about one or another, I don't think it works. Life doesn't work that way. Conservation also doesn't work like that. And so it's trying to look at the combination between the social and environmental, particularly because I come from where I come from, where the social issues are so important. And I'll give you just one example linked to gender, for instance. The fact that women or men in the family is held by, land in the family is held by men, you find a lot of resistance from women to contribute to biodiversity conservation efforts, because whatever they do, they don't take credit, and if something happens and there's a divorce or whatever, then they lose land. They lose land and they lose all their efforts will have been for somebody else and not for themselves. And so that's why for me it's difficult to say it's this or that, because you have to consider social, address those, because then you will have everybody committing and being able to benefit from the biodiversity conservation efforts.
Thanks, Milagre, for that very nuanced answer to a complex question.
I can try. I'm not a biodiversity expert, and so I might not have a specific point to emphasize on what the standard would look like, but I can talk about a challenge that we're facing if we want to come up with a biodiversity credit. The first one is biodiversity data sets that we have is very sparse, right? We need a much more granular data sets of biodiversity to be able to look into which hotspots of which area have the hotspots of biodiversity, in order for us to monitor and to intervene that. And the second is we're dealing a lot with movement of species, especially if you're talking about tropical area. There's going to be a lot of challenges in determining the scope of the intervention and the scope of the outcomes. If you're talking about biodiversity credit, then you have to account for that kind of movement as well. And density of the assessment, this is also a big issue, because when you want to start a project, when you want to build a PDD, a project design document, more often than not, you would be asked to provide a very granular assessment on the baseline, and developing a biodiversity baseline is expensive. It's difficult, and if we want to have a biodiversity credit, then that baseline needs to be very credible. So you have an economic challenge there as well. How do you finance the readiness, the baseline development, to have a credible and robust outcomes in the future? Hopefully that answers indirectly the questions. I guess that's the challenge moving forward.
Can I maybe add one final thought here? I think that independent of one or other, this is not I think the real question for me, the real question is for what? I think we really need to keep in mind that the whole discussion on the carbon and the biodiversity, or even nature credit, which again, I will repeat, I don't like it, and mainly because of what Milagre told to us, who we are to monetize nature. I don't feel that we are big enough to do that. But independently of that, we need to be focused on what's the goal here. On doing this, integrity, environmental integrity, and benefit sharing. Social integrity is not a good word, but you understand what I mean. It's more important than the economic model. So we normally waste a lot developing systems, certifications, monitorings, pricings, models, and etc. So I think that we really need to be sure and to keep our mind in the final goal, and take our own decisions based on that, and not on the specificities, and of the market recognition and etc. I know that it's a subjective answer, but I think it's real important in all of this biodiversity, carbon, and markets. They don't exist per se. They exist to end themselves. Like they exist to not exist anymore. Then potentially, they exist should not be necessary anymore. So hopefully this is, I don't know, the criteria to make a decision between one or another.
All right. Fabíola, thank you for that, and that's a great way to wrap up this, this panel. So Fabíola, Milagre, Andika, thank you so much for spending your Saturday afternoon or morning with us. We really appreciate it, so please join me in thanking them. I'd like to also thank Kaylee for, and the ISTF team for doing the hard work of pulling the panel together and coordinating this and creating and curating such a good set of questions and discussion for us. And finally, thank you all for braving this rather frigid weather. I know you have much more to enjoy today at the ISTF conference, so just bundle up when you leave, please. Tomorrow's going to be great. Hopefully some of you will be able to be with us on Sunday because it'll be rather warm-ish. Anyway, thank you.
Good to see you, Fabíola.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Gary.
Obrigada, Milagre. Prazer.
Tchau. Obrigada.
Thank you so much, Gary, and all of our panelists and our audience as well.